Hi, everyone, and welcome to the lineup. Today is April the 13th, 2023. I'm Barry Stagner and very glad to be back with you this week. Had a wonderful time on our family vacation. And as some of you can probably see, I got a little bit of sun. Just a great time away. Appreciate everybody who prayed for us and left encouraging messages. Getting away with the family is such a rare commodity these days. It's tough to squeeze something like this in, a week off in with everybody's schedules these days. But just had a wonderful time and good to be back with you this week. And what an incredible time we're living in. I think all of us are probably scratching our heads to a degree, just wondering how much longer can things go? And, the world is just unraveling. Things are happening at a breakneck speed. And again, this is exactly what you would expect when we've entered the period of the birth pangs. And so things are getting happening faster and faster. The pangs are getting closer and closer together. I've got major things happening in Israel and around the world. We've got, economic woes happening in our own country and across the globe, and weather anomalies are abounding. I read an article just this morning that, here in Southern California, I was talking with somebody last night. I've born and raised here, lived in Orange County, and we lived up in outside of Portland, Oregon for about 18 months right after we got married. But I was born here in the city of Orange, lived in Anaheim, growing up. And basically, other than that 18 months, I've lived in Orange County or Southern California for my whole life. And I've never seen, the things that we're seeing right now as far as weather-related things. April, normally we get some sporadic rain, but, it's just downright cold here, cold for us. And been moisture on the ground all day yesterday, all day today, just kind of a slow mist. And I read an article this morning that said that the La Nina that has been with us, which is cold surface water in the Pacific, has finally broken after 3 years. And they are showing signs of what they're calling a super El Nino. And an El Nino plays major influence, especially here in Southern California. And California as a whole, with the warm water, has the opposite effect on the Pacific. The surface temperatures are extremely high for the Pacific Ocean, and that brings in what they call the Pineapple Express, weather coming up from the south, warm weather, wet weather, and they're expecting a repeat of this year next year with this super El Nino, only without all the snow and just heavy, heavy rain. So, and things are happening all over the world. And with El Nino also comes dry, hot weather in other places. So we're just seeing so many things that ought to remind us that when we see these things at their beginning, when they begin to come to pass, we ought to look up, for our redemption is nigh. Well, we're going to start with what's happening in the Middle East right now and talk about some of the things happening there as they relate to Bible prophecy. And the first article we'll look at tonight comes from the Times of Israel, where the headline reads, "Israel must prepare for war with Iran without U.S. help," the former NSA chief says. Former National Security Advisor Yaakov Amidror said Thursday that war with Iran is increasingly likely, and Israel needs to gear up to attack without U.S. assistance. "We need to prepare for war. It's possible that we will reach a point where we have to attack Iran even without American assistance," Amidror, a hawkish former general who served as the National Security Council chief under Benjamin Netanyahu in 2011 to 13, said in a radio interview. And Amidror was discussing a flare-up over the Passover holiday that saw rockets fired at Israel from Gaza, Lebanon, and Syria by groups largely seen as Iranian proxies. "Iran is more sure of itself. It has managed to sign a number of agreements with Arab states. The world is starting to look different," he said, referring to the recent agreements by the UAE and Saudi Arabia to restore diplomatic ties with Tehran. "With all that, the chances of security deterioration are greater," Amidror said. He also questioned the U.S. commitment to Israel's security. "America is not the same America in terms of its presence, and the Iranians see that. The U.S. has much greater problems than the Middle East. The world looks at Israel differently," he said. Amidror's statements come despite repeated U.S. declarations it is committed to Israel's security And the recent show of force last week when it broke protocol and announced it had dispatched a nuclear-guided submarine, we'll talk about that in a moment, into Middle Eastern waters. And amid a multi-front escalation of violence, 36 rockets were launched into Israel from Lebanon on April 6th. 2 people were lightly injured by shrapnel. So again, we see protests coming around the world, anti-Semitic comments and rallies happening all over the world, reminding us that this is exactly what we would expect to see in the last days. The whole world, Jerusalem becoming a burdensome stone to all peoples. It is the subject and just amazing. Some 8,800 square miles, specifically 70 square miles known as Jerusalem, 35 acres known as the Temple Mount, is a topic of discussion all over the world. Everybody has an opinion on the nation of Israel, city of Jerusalem, the two-state solution, all these things. It is what the world is talking about today, just like Zechariah the prophet in 12 verse 3 prophesied that it was going to happen. So watching this, and there's another kind of a sub point to this article, and it's a sad truth for us here in America that the Israelis are not expecting any help from this current administration. And, a lot of people would debate the issue, and I believe they would be wrong on that because Genesis 12:3 is still in play. The Lord will bless those who bless Israel, and he will curse those who curse Israel. And, all the nations of the earth are still being blessed through the one who is known as the Holy One of Israel, who came from the tribe of Judah. So if that's still active, so is the rest of the promise. So again, it's a sad thing to see our nation not stand with Israel, or at least be somewhat indifferent or side with those who say they are occupying territory and those types of things. This is land that God gave them. And he gave it to them by everlasting, unconditional covenant. And that's why he said, I'm going to bring you back into the land in the last days. Because every day, he said to the prophet Ezekiel, every day that the Jews are outside of the land of promise, his name is being profaned among the nations. So the Lord brought them back for his name's sake. And therefore, it is their land according to the word of God. And it doesn't matter who was there when or who was there before them or any of those other things. And it doesn't matter who wants to lay claim to it now. And it doesn't matter that the Muslims claim to be Jerusalem and the Temple Mount to be the third holiest site in Islam. And by the way, any Muslim scholar with their salt will tell you in the Hadith of the Sunnah that the faraway mosque that's mentioned in the Quran is not Jerusalem. It is in Saudi Arabia, just like Mecca and Medina. The 3 holy sites in Islam are all in Saudi Arabia, not in Jerusalem. So, but again, this is the focus of world attention, and we should be looking up. And, it just, I say this all the time at the church, and I mean it more today than I did when I said it on Sunday. Man, it's got to be soon. It's got to be soon. The Lord coming for us. So many things are happening. And I wanted to throw something out. I actually tried to track it down, but my good friend Amir Sarfati has some resources that I don't have access to, being a former intelligence officer in the IDF. He has some relationships that makes him privy to information that the rest of us can't get a hold of. But I tried to track this article down, but I'll just share with you what he put on Telegram earlier today. He was talking about the Hezbollah leader, Hassan Nasrallah. He said, and I'm quoting Nasrallah, "We have capabilities and we will show it tomorrow." And this again, he said this on Thursday. So he's saying this is going to happen on Friday, which is the big prayer day for the Muslims. And tomorrow will not be just another day, Nasrallah went on to say. It will be an important day for the liberation. Israel is in the greatest internal crisis in its 75 years of existence, and it is crumbling and collapsing. Well, Hassan, let me tell you something. The prophet Amos said that when the Jews are back in the land, they will not be uprooted again, ever. It is the Lord who fights for Israel, and Zechariah 14 talks about the fact that in that day when Israel comes under fire and is attacked from all directions, the Lord will fight as he fights in the day of battle. And he's already been protecting the nation of Israel, even though we haven't seen all that's going to happen during the tribulation period, nor will we see it. because we have an appointment with the dead in Christ to meet the Lord in the air in a twinkling of an eye transition, and we will forever be with the Lord. Enjoy the Father's house for 7 years, then come back and rule and reign on the earth with the Lord. And that's when the marriage supper of the Lamb and all that's going to take place. The Bema seat of Christ will take place. All of this, according to the traditional Jewish wedding, happens at the Father's house. So we have much to be excited about and to look forward to. And let me share something with you that I shared last night at our church was praise night. And we've been doing this for 22, 23 years, maybe. Yeah, the first Wednesday of the month, we just worship the Lord through song. And, last night it just kind of hit me. I was thinking all day yesterday about the fact that can you imagine what the first gathering or the first few gatherings were like of the followers of Christ after he had been risen from the dead? We were looking at the calendar. Most people believe, many, I should say, believe that the Passover that Jesus was crucified on was April 6, 32 AD, which means that he would have risen from the dead on April 9th, 32 AD, according to our Gregorian calendar. So April 12th would have been right in sync with the calendar as far as we follow it. Of course, Passover follows the lunar cycle, so that's why it's on a different date every year. But can you imagine the level of excitement when the church started gathering together, or the believers started to gather together, even before the church was born on that Pentecost Sunday when they were all filled with the Spirit and tongues of fire settled upon them, and they spoke in the languages of the culture of the day, and people heard the gospel. It just had to be exciting. And what I was encouraging the church in last night is, it doesn't matter whether it's 3 days after Jesus rose from the dead or 1900 plus years after Jesus rose from the dead. He is still alive today, and we should be equally as excited as though he just rose 3 days ago, even though we're now nearly 2 millennia away from his resurrection. We're going to see him again someday, and when we see him, John the Beloved said, we will be like him, for we will see him as he is. So, in all of this, don't lose heart. Great things are coming our way, even though we're living in perilous times, and tribulation and trials are all around us, and so many crazy things are happening in our world. And the Lord said, yeah, that's what it's going to be like when I'm coming to get you. There'll be a low level of expectancy of his return. And boy, are we seeing that today. Now, Bloomberg is reporting what was mentioned in the last story from the Times of Israel. The U.S. deploys nuclear submarine in the Mideast amid Iran tension. The United States military revealed Saturday that it has deployed a nuclear-powered submarine in the Middle East in a show of force amid rising tensions with Iran. The USS Florida, capable of carrying as many as 154 Tomahawk land attack cruise missiles, began transitioning the Suez Canal from the Mediterranean Sea on Friday, according to the U.S. Naval Forces Central Command, which is based in Bahrain and in the Persian Gulf. The submarine is being deployed in support of the U.S. Fifth Fleet, which is also based in Bahrain, to ensure regional maritime security and stability, said Commander Tim Hawkins, spokesman for the U.S. Naval Forces Central Command. Hawkins declined to provide further details on the mission or its timing, or to specify whether the submarine was headed to the Persian Gulf. It's extremely rare for the U.S. military to publicize movements of its nuclear-powered submarines. In October, U.S. Central Command announced a visit by its Chief General Michael Kurilla to a ballistic missile submarine in the Arabian Sea. Before that, excuse me, it was a guided missile submarine transiting the Strait of Hormuz late in December 2020. So it's an oddity to see the U.S. make an announcement such as this, but it was purposeful without question, and it was meant to communicate to the Iranian regime of the Islamic State and the Islamic State, I should say, that there is a powerful U.S. presence now in the area and potential battle theater. So, again, we know that there's wars and rumors of wars, and there's talk of it all around us here today. That's part of the last days scenario, according to Jesus. And we have seen this increase exponentially. And again, just thinking about this whole birth pang thing, where Jesus, mentioned there in Matthew 24, 3-8, that these are the beginning of sorrows. And I've mentioned to you before that phrase, beginning of sorrows, the word translated as beginning can mean commencement, and sorrows can also be translated as birth pangs, and it is translated as birth pangs in Paul's letter to the church at Thessaloniki, letters, I should say. So we are seeing the commencement of birth pangs. Things are moving and advancing rapidly, and things are happening just at unbelievable speed in every level of things that we would expect to see as they relate to Bible prophecy: moral corruption, spiritual defection, disrespect for the Word of God, good being called evil, evil being called good. It's just a tragic thing to see women today. And sadly, these quote unquote feminists aren't saying a word about the fact that there are uh, men competing in women's sports, basically eliminating any chance just because of the physical stature of a man being far greater, and the muscle mass and all these other things, especially for competitive sports that require strength and endurance. It's just a whole different thing. And, when you've got a man competing against women, but because they say they're women, everybody's rah, rah, rah behind it, including some of these feminist groups. And basically, it's just an elimination of women. And again, what a bizarre thing to see happen in these last days. But, good's being called evil, evil's being called good. Darkness and light have traded definitions, and both being metaphors for truth and lies. And, looking at these things, it's just unbelievable what's happening in our world. And everything is exactly as the Bible has said it would be. I think also, we look at what Peter said in 2 Peter chapter 3, about scoffers coming in the last days, saying, where's the promise of his coming? We've been hearing this since our ancestors fell asleep. People always been talking about this. And, things just continue as they were, all the stuff we've seen. But, you can't say that today because things are changing rapidly. And the scoffers are still out there. There's no question about that. But the evidence is overwhelming. And if you really consider the things we're seeing, Hebrews 10:25 tells us that we can see the day approaching. And if you happen to watch the message I did out at Pastor Jack's church, Chino Hills, a few weeks ago, I did a message called "The Sound of the Horseman." And not only can we see the day approaching, I believe we can hear the sound of the horseman, figuratively speaking, the hoofbeats of the things that are going to happen during their 4 rides of terror are basically formulating even now. And the precursors to them are happening right in front of our eyes. And, we're talking about economic collapse. And, the rider under the 3rd horse, it costs a whole day's pay just to have one meal. Under his ride of terror, the murderous hearts of man being manifested under the rider of the 2nd horse, who takes the pseudo peace from the earth that the rider on the 1st horse brings. And then finally, a third of the world's population is killed with the rider on the 4th horse, the pale green horse, the Chloros, the kind of a sickly green colored horse, as he rides onto the world scene, and Hades is following him. And, 1/3 of the world's population is going to die during that time frame. And so now we're seeing all this hatred stirring up, the animosity towards Christians happening in our world today, the defense of those, who are practicing things that the Bible has forbidden. All of these things simultaneously happening tell us our redemption is nigh. Jesus is coming soon. Now, excuse me, at times of Israel, it seems like anytime you fly on a plane or in close quarters, you always pick something up. And, I'm generally pretty careful about eating inflammatories just because I've had asthma for my whole life. And, when you're on vacation, you don't eat right. And I didn't, and I'm kind of paying the price. So anyway, pardon my coughing. But the Times of Israel is reporting that Iran transferred weapons into Syria under cover of earthquake aid flights. Iran has transported weapons and military equipment into Syria on flights bringing in humanitarian aid after February's devastating earthquakes, it was reported on Wednesday. 9 Syrian, Iranian, Israeli, and Western sources told the Reuters news agency that weaponry was to buttress Iran's defenses against Israel in Syria, as well as bolster Syrian President Bashar Assad, a key ally of Tehran. The report said the equipment included advanced communications equipment and radar batteries, as well as spare parts required for an upgrade of Syria's air defense system that was provided by Tehran. Reuters said that its sources for the report included Western intelligence officials, sources close to the Iranian and Israeli leadership, a Syrian military defector, and a serving Syrian officer. The sources told Reuters that Israeli defense officials became aware soon after the earthquake that Tehran was exploiting the situation to transfer weapons. Under the guise of shipments of earthquake aid to Syria, Israel has seen significant movements of military equipment from Iran, mainly transported in parts, an anonymous Israeli defense official told Reuters. Well, this should remind us that, there is coming the fulfillment of a prophecy. I call it a standalone prophecy there in Isaiah 17:1, that Damascus is going to become a ruinous heap. And, Israel has made many sorties into Syria to deal with some of these weapons that are being shipped in to Syria. And now here you've got, information that is quite clear that multiple sources are reporting, including a Syrian defector, as the article said, and a current serving Syrian officer, that Iran is shipping weaponry into Syria. And, of course, because of the location and proximity to Israel's Golan, the natural place for these things to be shipped to is Damascus. And someday it is going to become a ruinous heap. It will be uninhabitable. And, there are those who say, well, the 6th century BC, Sennacherib actually destroyed Damascus. Well, the problem with that is Damascus is here today. When the Bible says it won't be inhabited ever again, which is implied by the language there, then that's not going to happen. It's never going to be inhabited again. There will be no Damascus, and it will become a ruinous heap. Now, what's the catalyst for that? Who knows? Why is this going to happen? We've talked about some of the chemical weapons that Assad has used, and could it be that there's a chemical weapons cache that's stored there, and an Israeli missile hits that, and basically the place becomes contaminated, cannot be inhabited anymore, some type of limited nuclear strike? We don't know, but what we do know is it's going to happen, and what we do know is that Israel is not afraid to go in and take care of business, especially 40 miles from their northern border. And, in times past, before Israel captured the Golan, Syrian soldiers would just look down on the kibbutzim at the bottom of the hill of the Golan and just fire at civilian citizens and take the lives of Israelis, because that's their desire and goal. But, could this be part of what brings about the demise of Damascus? We don't know. But what we do know is Iran is at the heart of it. And, they've got multiple irons in the fire in this whole prophetic scenario of the last days. We do know they are going to be drawn down from the north, which Syria is on the north of Israel, with the other invading forces, and God is going to destroy them. And, it's interesting that you only find in the King James, where in the Ezekiel 38-39 war scenario, that it says that 5/6 of the invading armies are going to lie dead on the mountains of Israel. You don't see that in other translations, but the language is there in the King Jimmy, or King James as it's called. So, God is going to fight on behalf of Israel. And, because of the rain and all the clear signs that this is an act of God's defense personally on behalf of the nation of Israel, that he fights for Israel, I believe that the battle is probably going to end during the tribulation period, most likely early in the tribulation period. And I believe it is going to be the catalyst for the allowance of the rebuilding of the third temple on the Temple Mount. I think it is highly probable that this battle could start prior to the rapture of the church. And during the battle, at some point in time, the rapture of the church could happen. But we have to remember that the battle is going to last longer than it takes to read Ezekiel 38 and 39. It's just not, okay, they invade and then all of a sudden it's over. This invasion could go on and on. Definitely goes on long enough, for the Arab Gulf states and the Saudis, Sheba and Dedan, to protest this invasion. So, again, we're just seeing potential candidates that could be the catalyst to cause these things to be fulfilled. And, remember, it's just an amazing time to be alive and to think about all these things happening right before our eyes that literally hundreds of millions of other Christians only dreamed about seeing. And here we're watching the whole thing go down. And just like in the days of Noah, what are people doing? Buying and selling, marrying and giving in marriage. And even within the church, there are scoffers saying, there's no such thing as a rapture, and, all this, and many others saying, the church is actually going to take over and have dominion over the world and the 7 seats of power necessary to control all things. And, that's what so they have absolutely no expectation of the rapture of the church or the glorious appearing of our great God and Savior, Jesus Christ, because according to them, he can't come back until the church has dominion over these 7 seats of power. So listen, today be a great day for the rapture of the church. And, we just don't have any problems that the rapture wouldn't solve. We will be instantly in the presence of the Lord forever and ever and ever. And if I was watching today, I'd say amen to that. Now, the Jewish News Syndicate says, despite the lull, officials know heightened tensions are here to stay. No matter how you look at it, the current escalation is here to stay. Even if the flare-up with Hamas in Gaza and in the north is over for now, the chances of a multi-theater conflagration fomented by Iran have risen significantly, and it is doubtful whether the genie can be put back in the bottle. The escalation on all fronts has also had Hezbollah Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah meet this week in Lebanon with Hamas leaders, with a photo released showing all 3 men sitting in a room under Iran's Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei's picture. According to reports in Lebanon, during the meeting, they discussed the tension with Israel, including the clashes on the Temple Mount and the escalating resistance in Judea and Samaria and Gaza. And so far, the silver lining in the recent uptick in violence is that despite Israel being attacked on multiple fronts, Syria, Lebanon, Gaza, Judea, and Samaria, and within the Green Line, its enemies have so far not been united. Iran has been fanning the flames, but the Palestinians have been doing the actual work. That has had Israel give Hezbollah somewhat of the benefit of the doubt by not holding it accountable for 28 rockets from Lebanon after it said it was not involved. Even on Sunday, after the Hezbollah-Hamas summit, security officials still saw the Temple Mount as the main trigger of events. The fact that Hezbollah has yet to respond to the Israeli strikes on Lebanon following the rocket barrages, despite Nasrallah pledging that every Israeli attack would be met with a proper response, has been a source of guarded optimism in Israel. Officials have even noted that this could mean that the Israeli deterrence vis-a-vis Hezbollah has remained robust. But there's also another interpretation, that Nasrallah is waiting for the right moment to hit back and perhaps surprise Israel with a volley. That's what Amir was talking about earlier today, where he just said tomorrow is going to be a big day. And Nasrallah said that is. Nasrallah has wanted a direct confrontation with Israel, and now would have been the ideal moment from his perspective, with Israel torn from within and under attack from all sides. On Saturday, the Syrian arena entered the mix. No, not the actual Bashar al-Assad regime, but various forces that decided to fire rockets from Syria to Israel. It is still unclear who fired the 6 rockets toward the Golan Heights, but the assessment is that this was a Palestinian faction like in Lebanon. The IDF hit back at the sources of the launches and later also struck targets belonging to the Syrian military. This time, the IDF took responsibility for the attacks, unlike many other cases where Jerusalem has stayed mum on the strikes in Syria. It also said that it holds Damascus responsible for everything that happens on its soil, and it would not tolerate a breach of Israeli sovereignty. So again, Israel under attack from all directions, anti-Semitism growing in the world. And we do know, whatever form or fashion, the United States or China or any of these other, Russia, or any of these other major power players are going to hold positionally or governmentally, I should say, after the rapture of the church, we don't know. But what we do know is that all the nations of the earth are going to gather against Jerusalem. They are going to stand against Jerusalem, and Jerusalem will be actually did a message some years ago called One City Against the World. And, when that one city has God as its iron dome, an iron hand above it, the victory is assured and it will be theirs. Reuters is reporting that top Saudi Iranian diplomats to meet in China. Era of U.S. involvement in the region is over. A major meeting of top envoys from Saudi Arabia and Iran is expected to happen in Beijing on Thursday as the next significant step in the China brokered rapprochement and normalization of ties between the longtime enemies takes shape. As Reuters underscores, the meeting between Prince Faisal bin Farhan Al Saud and his Iranian counterpart Hussein, oh my goodness, Amir Abdullahian will be the first formal meeting between, that's a name that's got like 7 syllables in it, formal meeting between Saudi Arabia and Iran's most senior diplomats in more than 7 years. A senior Iranian official also confirmed that top envoys agreed to meet on April 6th in Beijing as the deal was facilitated by China. And that meeting, as you know, has already taken place. And the most important and illustrative of the way of the geopolitical winds are blowing is the following. The era of the United States involvement in this region is over. The regional countries are capable of preserving security and stability in the Middle East without Washington's interference, another Iranian official said. On the issue of China, the powerful U.S. rival leading the way in brokering peace, Saudi-owned Al-Sharq Al-Awsat newspaper cited a source in Riyadh to say that choosing China as a host country for the meeting came as an extension of Beijing's positive role in reaching an agreement and facilitating communication between the two countries. As for Tehran and Riyadh, not only has the regional rivalry, which intensified during most of the decade of the proxy war in Syria, which began in 2011, been set among a centuries-long divide over correct interpretation of Islam, Shia Iran versus Sunni Saudi Arabia. But it has also spilled over in places like Yemen, scene of another grinding proxy war, which pits Shia rebels against a Saudi-backed government. So, this has been going on for 15 centuries. So this is a temporary situation. There's no question about it, because we do know that the Saudis are going to protest the invasion that Iran is going to play a part in. And what will be the dividing factor is most likely the Shia-Sunni issue. They've been warring over this as to who should replace Muhammad since the death of Muhammad. Some say it has to be a blood relative. Others say, that it should be the most. Sunnis say it should be the most qualified among scholars, and the Shias say it needs to be a relative of Muhammad himself. And they've been fighting over this for all these years, and that's what has caused much of the division that has happened even in recent years between the birthplace of Islam, Saudi Arabia, and the Islamic State or the Islamic regime there in Iran. Now, Defense News is reporting that China warns as U.S. and Philippines stage combat drills. China warned on Wednesday that a deepening security alliance between the U.S. and the Philippines should not harm its security and territorial interests and interfere in long simmering territorial disputes in the South China Sea. When asked to comment on the combat exercises between American and Filipino forces that started on Tuesday in the Philippines, the Chinese embassy in Manila on Wednesday issued a statement by the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Wang Wenbin, who said such drills should not target any third party and should be conducive to regional peace and stability. Wang did not say how China would respond if it concludes that the U.S.-Philippine security cooperation was hurting Beijing's core interests. In Washington, the U.S. and Philippine defense and foreign secretaries met on Tuesday to discuss the development of 9 Philippine military camps where American forces have been allowed to stay indefinitely under the 2014 Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement. These sites will support combined training exercises and interoperability between our forces to ensure that we're even better prepared for future crisis, I should say, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin said. He added the U.S. was allocating more than $100 million to build infrastructure at these sites where Americans would be stationed, and China has strongly opposed that agreement, which would allow American forces to establish military staging grounds and surveillance outposts in the northern Philippines across the sea from the Taiwan Strait and in western Philippine provinces facing the disputed South China Sea. So it may have been, no harm, no foul kind of thing that came out of the Chinese embassy in Manila. But the truth is, there's more to the story, as our next story reports. And this comes from the Epoch Times. And China is seriously preparing to invade Taiwan, according to a former Marine colonel. China is seriously preparing for the invasion of Taiwan, according to Grant Newsom, a retired Marine colonel and senior research fellow at the Japan Forum for Strategic Studies. China reportedly sent 42 warplanes and 8 naval vessels toward Taiwan on April 8th in response to Taiwanese President Tsai Ing-wen's meeting with the U.S. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy on April 5th in California. Beijing's actions came as Chinese Communist Parties, or the CCP military, announced on April 8th that it was beginning 3 days of combat readiness patrols and joint sword exercises around Taiwan involving police patrols. During the drills, dozens of Chinese warplanes were spotted crossing the median line of the Taiwan Strait and Taiwan's southeast, basically no-fly zone. Even on April 11th, after its 3-day military exercises, the regime's provocative military actions continued. They've effectively said that this mutually agreed upon demarcation line down the middle of the Taiwan Strait doesn't matter. And they don't recognize it, and they are now flying their aircraft across it all the time. Newsom recently told China in Focus on the New Tang Dynasty news media outlet. So again, what's going to happen? And people ask all the time, well, where's China in Bible prophecy? Well, China's not in Bible prophecy. The U.S. is not in Bible prophecy. And, Russia and the other named nations of the Ezekiel invasion are named. But this points us to something we always need to keep in mind. And that is that the nations that are named in Bible prophecy are named because of their relationship, be it good or bad, with the nation of Israel. Now, those who protest against the invasion and those who are the invaders of Israel are named nations. So, we really can't say, well, the Bible says this is going to happen with China or this is going to happen with the U.S. But what we do know is that both China and the U.S. are not named in the Ezekiel war scenario. And, the protesting nations and the invading nations are all active and participating together currently. And even though, as we've talked about, we're going to see a breakdown in this whole Saudi-Iranian relationship thing. And maybe this whole invasion is the cause of it, because they have been making some moves toward normalizing ties with the nation of Israel and the other things we've talked about in time past. But, just watching these things happen, there's certain things that we just don't know. Where the Bible is silent, we should be too. So, Amir and I both get asked this question all the time. What role does China play? You've got well over 1 billion people in that country. Yeah, you've got the same thing in India. And India is not mentioned in Bible prophecy either. So you've got these, there's a good third of the world's population just in those two countries. And, in the U.S., with our 320 million people who live in this country, are just a minuscule portion of the global population. But, the U.S. is still the world's greatest superpower, and yet it's unmentioned. Why? We have no relationship with the events that relate to the 70th week of Daniel. So, I'm hoping that the reason that, we're not mentioned, the U.S. is not mentioned, is because the rapture basically causes this nation to implode, because people come to Christ in massive numbers, and, the rapture basically disables our country. The church is big in China too, even though it's underground. There's going to be a lot of things that people have to deal with. And, there's almost, the church in China is about 2/3 the size of the entire population of the U.S. So you have well over 200 million Christians, in China, all underground, and they're going to be taken in the rapture as well. So the world's going to be a mess. So it's not necessarily so that after the rapture there's going to be a China or there's going to be a United States. That could be why they're not named, because we do know that the whole geopolitical landscape is going to change unto the Antichrist. And that's why, we're seeing all this talk about a great reset. And listen, Soros and Gates and Schwab and all these others, they're not going to have anything to do with global governance after the church is gone and the Antichrist rises to power. Matter of fact, he's going to kill his competition and those who stand against him, and he will be ruling during that time. So, again, watching all these things happen, we don't know where they're going to go and what role this whole China potential war with Taiwan is going to bring, other than the fact that there will be wars and rumors of them right before Jesus comes on an exponential scale. And American military news says we're switching gears a little bit here. The FBI plan to spy on Catholic churches to combat domestic terrorism, documents show. New internal documents released by House Judiciary Committee reveal that the FBI worked to develop sources within Christian churches and Catholic dioceses as a part of a broader effort to fight so-called domestic terrorism. And by the way, terrorism today is defined as disagreeing with the government. Obtained in February by House Judiciary Committee Chairman Jim Jordan and Representative Mike Johnson, the document showed the Bureau sought to use churches as new avenues for tripwire and source development. Mainline Catholic parishes would be specifically targeted, the document said. Based on the limited information produced by the FBI to the committee, we now know that the FBI relied on at least one undercover agent to produce its analysis, and that the FBI proposed that its agents engage in outreach to Catholic parishes to develop sources among the clergy and church leadership to inform on Americans practicing their faith, Jordan wrote in a letter to FBI Director Christopher Wray, according to Fox News. This information is outrageous and only reinforces the committee's need for all FBI material responsive to our request, Jordan continued. The documents produced to date show how the FBI sought to enlist Catholic houses of worship as potential sources to monitor and report on their parishioners. Jordan also subpoenaed Ray over previously requested documents that the Bureau has failed to turn over. Americans attend church to worship and congregate for their spiritual and personal betterment. The letter continued, they must be free to exercise their fundamental First Amendment rights without worrying that the FBI may have planted so-called tripwire sources or other informants in their houses of worship. So if we're going to take anything away from that, it's simply that the church, whatever you want to say about the Catholic Church, but in the eyes of the government, that's part of the church, and we're the enemy. Christians are the enemy, and they need to have people on the inside to fight against domestic terrorism. Now, when's the last time you heard of a born-again believer committing an act of terror? Well, it just doesn't happen. Anybody that says they're a Christian that goes out and murders a bunch of people is mentally unstable. And that's just not something God has called us to do. And no church is going to be teaching that. But, the problem is we have our own definitions of truth that come from God's word. And that is the two genders, male and female, the limitation for sexual activity between a married man and woman only, both being biological male and female, the right to life and the protection of the unborn. All of these things are enemies of what is happening in our world today and the advancement of this liberal agenda. So they're trying to get people on the inside to expose who's saying just heinous things like you're either a boy or a girl. And, again, it just, pardon the expression, but it blows my mind that all of a sudden today you can get arrested for hurting somebody's feelings. And, that's just part of life. People say stuff that hurts your feelings all the time. But these days, you can't say anything, even though it's true, if it hurts somebody's feelings. And that's why we have all these ridiculous safe places on college campuses and all that. Because our young people, many of them, I should say, there's still wonderful, godly young people all over our country, and thankful for them. But there's many who have been indoctrinated and have bought the lie And we're going to believe the next one too, when some guy comes onto the world scene and claims to be God. So, again, the FBI infiltrating churches. And the Gateway Pundit reports that Hawley accuses Merrick Garland of lying under oath about the FBI not targeting Catholic parishes. Senator Josh Hawley accused U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland of lying under oath about the FBI not targeting Catholic parishes. And Chris Wray's FBI is now infiltrating parishes. The FBI agents are engaging in outreach to Catholic leaders to spy on Americans practicing their Christian faith. And the article goes on, actually, to quote the last article we just read, and Merrick Garland told me under oath the FBI was not targeting Catholic parishes. That appears to have been a lie. I want the truth, Josh Hawley said on Tuesday. Last month, I questioned you before the Senate Judiciary Committee about recent anti-Catholic actions by the DOJ. There was the targeting of Catholic pro-life activist Mark Houck and overwhelming FBI force, all based on a trumped-up charge of which he was swiftly acquitted. Then there was the eternal memorandum issued by the FBI's Richmond field office calling for the reconnaissance and investigation of traditional Catholics, Hawley wrote in a letter to Garland. And Garland had, as Hawley accused him of, lied under oath, saying it wasn't happening. And now we have the proof. And so we've got, corruption at every level of government. And it's sad that it's here in the U.S. because we've basically been so blessed because of our Constitution and that all men, and our Declaration of Independence, that all men are equal in the eyes of God and have been endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights or inalienable rights, among which are these: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Has the U.S. been perfect? Far from it. But we have been blessed, and we have sought to be, in the past, a nation that respects and honors God. And, I just think I watch these clips every once in a while from those of you who are old enough to remember President Ronald Reagan, and just the respect that he had for the White House and even the Oval Office. He never, in his 8 years in the Oval Office, he never entered that room without a coat and tie on. He had such respect for the office and for the American people. And he was one, oddly enough, the President of the United States said the most 9 terrifying words in the English language are, "I'm from the government and I'm here to help." He was pro-American people, and boy, in just that brief period of time, we have fallen into what we are today. And Just the News is reporting that Governor Newsom from California stockpiles 2 million abortion pills so Californians can access them after the judge's ruling. The medication Newsom is stockpiling is one of 2 FDA-approved drugs that induce abortion. California Democrat Governor Gavin Newsom is stockpiling as much as 2 million misoprostol pills to terminate a pregnancy after a federal judge's ruling last week that sought to halt the FDA's approval of another abortifacient, mifepristone. And we will not cave to extremists who are trying to outlaw these critical abortion services, Newsom said Monday in announcing his plan. Medication abortion remains legal in California. And I thought, just all the stuff that this guy has pulled here in California, the abuse of power, all the other things that he's done. He's basically destroying California. And now he's gallivanting all over the country on California taxpayers' dime, trying to position himself for a run for president. Well, listen, if you want the rest of the country to be a mess like California, then just vote for that guy. And, I thought, and just all the stunts that this guy has pulled, using California taxpayer dollars to fly people from other states where abortion is becoming illegal to pay for their travel and to bring them here in California to kill their baby. It's that old saying, I think, we think of, there's a special place in hell for people like that. And, I got to thinking about that. There are no special places in hell. It's just hell. And, lest this man repent, and all the, I always think back on the abortion issue about what Jesus said about causing a child or harming a child and causing them to stumble, and the dim view the Lord takes on that. that better for a millstone to be hung around their neck and be cast into the sea. And this guy is just, all the gender stuff he's doing, and mutilating the bodies of our children, and financing it, and all these other things. And the man needs Jesus. There's no question about it. And should he fail to repent, and should maybe he already be at that stage where he's finalized his decision about the person of Jesus, it is not going to bode well for him in the next life, and even this one. A couple more things, and we'll wrap things up today. And this is kind of a public service announcement. And it was an interesting article that came from the Epic Times. And the article says, avoid using free public charging stations for phones. This is an FBI warning. The FBI is warning people to not use public phone charging stations. And I wanted to cover this because, they're all over airports. And because hackers have been taking advantage of the situation to infect connected devices with malware. Avoid using free charging stations in airports, hotels, or shopping centers, FBI Denver said in an April 6th Twitter post. Bad actors have figured out ways to use public USB ports to introduce malware and monitoring software onto devices. Carry your own charger and USB cord and use an electrical outlet instead. Malware is software designed to gain unauthorized access to devices, such as mobile phones and laptops. Once hackers gain access, they can manipulate the device's tools and apps for their own personal gain or disrupt the original user's life. Criminals can track keystrokes and get hold of personal information and commit identity fraud, as well as use financial information to steal funds, among other activities. And when bad actors use dirty USBs at public charging stations to infect devices with malware, it's known as juice jacking. At present, many malls, airports, and public convenience stations have charging stations that are used regularly by commuters. And the agency has recommended that consumers carry their own USB cables and charging plugs and use AC electrical outlets instead. And this story has some weight for a couple of reasons, and one of them is obviously just the word of advice to all of us. Just don't do that. Don't use these public charging stations where you take your cord, your USB connector, and just plug it right in, and instead of using an outlet in your charger cable and charging in that way, because there's all the stuff that we see going on today, identity fraud and theft and all those things that the article mentioned. But one of the reasons I wanted to include this article is because there is a way to solve all of these things, and that is that nobody can buy or sell unless they have a specific mark on their hand or forehead. And all these things, we have to remember that, the mark of the beast is going to be presented as a positive thing. It's going to be presented as, especially after the rapture, with all the confusion that's going to happen, all the turmoil that's going to take place, all the abandoned property, as well as the abandoned bills that are going to be paid, the identity theft and all those things, and people hacking into accounts of people that have been taken in a moment, in a twinkling of an eye. The world's just going to be a mess. And one of the solutions is going to be we can eliminate all of this kind of thing by simply either you have a mark or you don't, and you can't buy or sell unless you have it. So again, we're getting close. Keep looking up. Our redemption is nigh. And one more thing, and then I'll let you go for the night. And this actually came this morning. I got this email from the Family Research Council and the wonderful work that they do back there and in D.C. And it's an update on hostility against churches. And, we have a very extensive security team at our church, well-trained. We have a multitude of people that are trained in both armed security as well as, personal security. And, it took me a while to get used to it. Because I don't know, it's just different. And, but, the more that's going on and the more, especially having the relationship that I have with Amir and, how many people there are who are anti-Israel and all that, it's just something, it's a good idea to have. But, this update that came out of FRC just this morning reported this, and they've been tracking these stats now for some 6 years. And in 2018, in the United States, there were 50 acts of hostility against Christian churches. In 2019, there were 83. In 2020, there were 54 acts of hostility. The number went down. And then in 2021, there were 96 acts of hostility against Christian churches. And then in 2022, the number jumped to almost 195, up to 191 acts of hostility. Now, in the first quarter of 2023, there have already been 69 acts of hostility, and that's 3 times the number of 2022's first quarter. So this is, just increasing exponentially, 3 times the number already this year, and we've only got 1 quarter under our belt. So that's going to be a big number, pushing 300 acts of hostility against Christian churches in this country, and it's just growing and growing and growing. Of course, we had, the shooting at a Christian school just a couple of weeks ago, that tragic event that took place there with the trans shooter and all that stuff, and another one that was thwarted in Colorado last week. And just, these things are happening, and we need to be aware. We need to do our due diligence and watch out. And, if your church has a security team, be a part of it. Especially if you're a police officer, ex-military, or things like that. We have active police officers as well as former police officers and that type of thing at the church. And it's just the way it is these days, because the devil hates us, and he only comes to steal, to kill, and destroy. And who he's after is the church, because the church is the only ones who have the message of truth that can save people's souls. And, Satan, and I've said this in different messages, and I think, one of the things that we think with our human mind and, human rationale, and, it doesn't always work that way, especially when you're thinking about the spiritual realm. We have to remember Satan hates his followers too. He doesn't just hate those who oppose him. He hates those who are for him. He wants to kill them too. He wants nothing more than to see all people dead and burning in hell where he's headed. So again, watching these things happen, the increase in hostility against the church tells us another sign or symptom that things are wrapping up. The Lord's coming for us soon. Well, that's it for this week. And again, thanks for your prayers and your patience for not having a program last week. And, I just want to encourage you. These are amazing times to be alive. And God has not given us the spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind. And, a lot of people now, there's lots of talk about an economic collapse and the collapse of the dollar and all those things. Just be wise and, put some stuff aside and have some food ready. And, there's nothing wrong with doing those things. We don't want to crawl in a hole or live in a cave or any of those things. But, we've got boxes of long-term dehydrated food in our garage. And, we've had them this is actually our second batch. We had a batch that had a 20-year shelf life, and now we've got a second batch to feed our whole family for several months. So, that's not a lapse of faith. That's just wisdom. You never know. It could be an earthquake. Could be, the power grid goes down. Who knows? So let's just, let's not crawl in a hole or live in fear. Let's just be smart. And this whole time, we need to be telling people about Jesus. So, well, that's it for this week. And it's been kind of a big week for us. I love people asking about Louis, our big boy. We just love so much. He's been gone for 3 weeks. He's been in a board and train facility, and we just got him back day before yesterday. And so he's been getting professionally trained, and it's just been wonderful. He's a pup. He's a big old pit bull, and, many people are naturally scared of him. But people who've ever had a pit bull knows how awesome they are and how sweet they are. And just big old teddy bears is all they are. And, but, he's strong. And, part of the reason we got him is, one, Terry, she loves to walk and power walk, and she wants to walk with him, and he just too strong. And so he had to learn He had to learn his manners, so he's home and doing great. And I'll pop him up for you to have a look at here in a couple of weeks. But anyway, again, great to be back with you. Thanks again for the prayers. And keep looking up. Our redemption is nigh. The day is approaching. We can see it. We can hear the pounding hoofs of the horsemen. All these things are on the horizon. Jesus is coming for us soon. So, with that, I'll see you here, there, or in the air. God bless.